I was mopping the floor at an art gallery when I saw it, a painting my late son made at 6 years old. Price tag, $150,000. Sir, that is mine, I said. Impossible! The owner laughed. He called security to kick me out, but he forgot to check the secret message on the back of the canvas. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The marble floors of the Whitfield Gallery gleamed under the afternoon light, each surface reflecting the carefully positioned spotlights that made every piece of art look like a treasure. I pushed my mop bucket across the polished stone, the wheels squeaking softly in the hushed atmosphere. After 3 years of working here, I knew every corner, every painting, every sculpture. The gallery was my second home, though I was invisible to most people who walked through these doors. My name is Howard Brennan, and at 61 years old, I clean this place 6 days a week for $850 a month. It's not much, but it pays the rent on my studio apartment in Brooklyn and keeps me fed. Most importantly, it keeps me around art, which used to mean everything to me. The afternoon shift was always quieter. Fewer visitors, less pretentious chatter about artistic vision and cultural significance. I preferred the silence. It let me think, or sometimes it let me avoid thinking entirely. I was working my way through the main exhibition hall when something stopped me cold. There, hanging on the east wall under a perfectly angled spotlight, was a small painting that made my heart skip a beat. The canvas was maybe 12 by 16 inches, showing a blue elephant standing in a field of yellow flowers. The brushstrokes were bold, uneven, filled with the kind of innocent confidence that only comes from a child's hand. But this wasn't just any child's painting. I dropped the mop handle. It clattered against the marble, echoing through the empty gallery like a gunshot. My legs felt weak as I stepped closer, my eyes fixed on details that no one else would notice. The way the elephant's trunk curved slightly to the left, the 3 tiny birds in the corner, painted with deliberate purple dots. The signature in the bottom right corner, written in careful block letters, Alex. My breath caught in my throat. This was impossible. I fumbled for my glasses, cleaning them with shaking fingers before looking again. Nothing changed. The painting was still there, still unmistakably the work of my son, Alex, who had been dead for 8 years. The price tag beside it made my stomach lurch, $150,000. Excuse me. The voice behind me was sharp, irritated. What are you doing? I turned to find Marcus Whitfield striding toward me, his expensive Italian shoes clicking against the marble with the rhythm of someone used to commanding attention. At 55, Marcus had the kind of polished appearance that money could buy. Perfectly styled silver hair, a suit that probably cost more than I made in 6 months, and the perpetual expression of someone who believed the world owed him deference. Sir, I said, my voice coming out rougher than intended. This painting. I need to ask you about this painting. Marcus glanced at the canvas dismissively. That's one of our featured pieces. Blue Elephant in Paradise, by a promising young artist. Very collectible. His eyes narrowed as he looked back at me. Why? Surely you're not thinking of purchasing it on a janitor's salary. The condescension in his tone hit me like a slap, but I pushed through it. Sir, that painting, it belongs to me. Marcus let out a sharp laugh that echoed off the gallery walls. Impossible. This piece was acquired through proper channels from a reputable collector. The provenance is impeccable. No, you don't understand. I stepped closer to the painting, pointing at details that were burned into my memory. Look at the brush technique here, the way the paint is layered, and there, I pointed to a small detail in the background. That's not just a random mark. It's supposed to be a tiny house. The artist told me that when he painted it. The artist? Marcus's eyebrows rose mockingly. And who might that be? My son, Alex. He painted this when he was 6 years old. The silence that followed was heavy and uncomfortable. Marcus stared at me for a long moment, his expression shifting from amusement to something closer to concern, as if he was worried about my mental state. Mr. Brennan, he said slowly, using my name for the first time in 3 years of employment. I think perhaps you're confused. This is a professional work by an established artist. The documentation clearly shows. I don't care what your documentation shows. The words came out louder than I intended, raw with emotion I'd kept buried for years. I know my own son's work. I taught him how to hold that brush. I mixed those exact colors with him, that blue, that specific shade of blue. We made it together by adding white to cerulean and just a touch of yellow. Marcus stepped back, his hand moving instinctively toward his phone. Mr. Brennan, I think you need to calm down. Perhaps you should go home for the day. Look at the back, I said desperately. If this is really Alex's painting, there should be something written on the back of the canvas. He always wrote messages on the back. Security, Marcus called out, his voice echoing through the gallery. 2 men in dark suits appeared from seemingly nowhere, their faces professionally blank. Wait, I pleaded, reaching toward the painting. Just look at the back, please. Mr. Brennan, Marcus said coldly, you're clearly having some kind of breakdown. I'm going to have you escorted out, and I suggest you don't return tomorrow or any day after that. The security guards flanked me, their hands hovering near my arms. Looked back at the painting one more time, memorizing every detail, every brushstroke that spoke to me across 8 years of grief and loss. This isn't over, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. That's my son's painting, and I'm going to prove it. Marcus straightened his tie with the casual arrogance of a man who believed himself untouchable. Good luck with that, Mr. Brennan, though I suspect you'll find that delusional thinking doesn't hold up well in court. The security guards escorted me through the gallery's front entrance, past the polished reception desk and the carefully arranged promotional materials. The cool October air hit my face like a wake-up call as the glass doors closed behind me with a soft, final click. I stood on the sidewalk, staring back at the gallery's elegant facade. Through the window, I could see the painting hanging in its place of honor, my son's work being sold for more money than I'd made in the last 10 years combined. But Marcus had made a mistake. In his arrogance, in his certainty that a broken-down janitor could never challenge him, he'd forgotten to check one crucial thing. He'd forgotten to look at what might be written on the back of that canvas. If he had, he would have found 5 words that would change everything. For Papa, my best teacher. I walked the 23 blocks from the gallery to my apartment in Brooklyn, needing the time to think, to process what I'd just seen. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. Each step on the concrete felt like walking backward through time, pulling me toward memories I'd spent 8 years trying to keep locked away. My studio apartment was exactly 400 square feet of faded carpet and peeling paint. The rent was $600 a month, which was a stretch on my cleaning salary, but it was mine. I collapsed onto my thrift store couch, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a cloud, or maybe a dog, depending on the light. Alex would have seen something beautiful in that stain. He saw beauty in everything. My son was born in 2008, on a Tuesday morning in October when the leaves were just starting to turn. Sarah had been in labor for 14 hours, and when Alex finally arrived, screaming and red-faced and perfect, I knew my life had just been divided into before and after. Before Alex, I'd been Howard Brennan, high school art teacher, moderately successful weekend painter, husband to Sarah. After Alex, I was simply Papa. From the moment he could hold a crayon, Alex was creating. Not the random scribbles most children make, but deliberate compositions that showed an understanding of color and form that amazed everyone who saw them. By the time he was 4, he was using real paintbrushes, mixing colors with the precision of someone who understood that art was about more than just making pretty pictures. I taught him everything I knew. How to see light and shadow, how to make blue by mixing cerulean with white and just a touch of yellow to warm it up. How to let the brush flow naturally instead of forcing it across the canvas. But mostly he taught himself, with an intuition that left me speechless. The blue elephant painting Marcus was selling for $150,000 had been created on a Saturday afternoon in 2014. Alex was 6, and we'd been experimenting with a new set of watercolors I'd brought home from school. He'd been quiet that morning, more thoughtful than usual. "Papa," he'd said, his small fingers carefully selecting a brush from the set I'd given him for his birthday. "I want to paint something happy." "What makes you happy, buddy?" He'd tilted his head, considering the question with the seriousness of a philosopher. "Elephants. They're so big and strong, but they're gentle, and they take care of their babies." I'd watched him work for 3 hours straight, his tongue poking out slightly in concentration as he created that magnificent blue elephant standing in a field of yellow flowers. When he was finished, he'd looked at me with those bright brown eyes and said, "This is for you, Papa, because you take care of me like elephant papas take care of their babies." He'd insisted on writing a message on the back of the canvas, carefully spelling out each word, "For Papa, my best teacher." That painting had hung in our kitchen for 2 years, bringing a smile to my face every morning over coffee. Sarah used to tease me about it, saying I loved it more than the expensive prints we'd bought for the living room. She was right. Everything changed in 2016. Alex had been complaining about being tired, about his legs hurting. Sarah thought it was growing pains. I thought maybe he was just not getting enough sleep. The pediatrician ordered blood tests to rule out anything serious, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The words hit like a physical blow, knocking the air out of my lungs and rearranging the architecture of our world. Suddenly, our days were measured in hospital visits, blood counts, chemotherapy sessions, and small victories that felt enormous. Alex handled it better than Sarah or I did. Even when he was sick from the treatments, even when he lost his beautiful dark hair, he kept painting. The hospital staff set up a small easel in his room, and he'd work for hours, creating images of hope and dreams and the future he was determined to have. "Art makes me feel strong, Papa," he told me one afternoon as he painted a family of rabbits having a picnic. "When I'm painting, I forget about being sick." The treatment lasted 18 months. 18 months of hope and fear, of good days and terrible days, of medical bills that climbed past $300,000 despite our insurance. Sarah took leave from her job at the bank. I used all my sick days and vacation time, then took unpaid leave to be with Alex. We sold everything we could: the car, my photography equipment, Sarah's jewelry, furniture we'd saved years to buy. None of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was giving Alex every chance to live. He died on a Tuesday morning in March 2016, 3 days after his 8th birthday. The last thing he painted was a small canvas showing a boy flying a kite with his father. The kite was blue, the same shade as his elephant. Sarah and I buried him on a Friday. By Sunday, we weren't talking to each other. By Christmas, she'd moved out. The divorce was finalized the following spring. I couldn't teach anymore. Standing in front of a classroom, trying to inspire teenagers to see beauty in art when my own world had gone gray, felt impossible. I took whatever work I could find: construction, retail, eventually the cleaning job at the gallery. It was ironic, maybe, being surrounded by art every day while feeling like I'd lost the ability to see it. Sarah remarried in 2018. James Mitchell, a real estate developer with a big house in Connecticut and no children of his own. She invited me to the wedding, which felt like salt in an open wound. I didn't go. The last time I'd seen any of Alex's artwork was at the funeral. People came back to our house afterward, the way they do, bringing casseroles and condolences. Sarah's sister had helped organize things, packing up Alex's room while I sat in the backyard, unable to face going through his belongings. When Sarah moved out 6 months later, she took everything that had been Alex's: his clothes, his toys, his books, and all of his artwork. I'd asked her about it once during one of our few phone conversations about dividing property. "I need them, Howard," she'd said, her voice thick with tears. "They're all I have left of him." I'd understood. I'd let her take everything because I thought it would help her heal, the way I hoped that distance and time would help me heal. Now I knew that somewhere along the way, she'd decided our son's memory was worth $15,000 to an intermediary who'd turned around and sold individual pieces for $45,000 each. I sat in my small apartment as the sun set outside my single window, staring at the empty walls where Alex's paintings should have been hanging. Tomorrow I would start making phone calls. I would find out how Marcus Whitfield had acquired my son's painting, and I would get it back. But first, I allowed myself to remember the weight of Alex's small hand in mine as we walked through museums together, his excited voice pointing out colors and shapes that caught his imagination. I remembered the smell of watercolor paints and the sound of his concentrated breathing as he worked. Most of all, I remembered his last words to me, whispered in the hospital room as machines beeped softly around us. "Take care of my paintings, Papa. They're my presents for you." I'd failed him once. I wouldn't fail him again. The next morning, I called in sick to my cleaning job for the first time in 3 years. My supervisor, Maria, sounded concerned over the phone, asking if I needed anything. I told her I had food poisoning and would be back tomorrow. The lie came easily because the truth felt impossible to explain. Instead of mopping floors, I spent the morning at the local library using their computer to research Marcus Whitfield and the Whitfield Gallery. What I found made my stomach turn. The gallery's website featured a section called Emerging Talents, showcasing work by promising young artists. There, in the featured collection, I found not one but 3 of Alex's paintings. Each had been given a pretentious title and backstory. The blue elephant was called Childhood Dreams in Cerulean, described as a masterful exploration of innocence and wonder by an artist who tragically passed away young. The price tags made me dizzy. $150,000, $200,000, $125,000. Together, they represented nearly $500,000 worth of my son's work. The artist biography made me physically sick. This promising young painter showed extraordinary talent before his untimely death. His work demonstrates a rare understanding of color and emotion that transcends his years. Each piece comes with full documentation of authenticity and provenance. There was no mention of Alex's name, no mention of his age when he created these works. They'd turned my 8-year-old son into a fictional character designed to sell paintings to wealthy collectors who wanted to own something beautiful and tragic. I printed out the pages, my hands shaking as I fed quarters into the library's ancient printer. The other patrons gave me curious looks, probably wondering why a 61-year-old man was crying in front of a computer screen. By noon, I'd tracked down the name of the intermediary who'd sold the paintings to Marcus. Thomas Kellner Fine Arts, located in Manhattan. The company specialized in estate sales and private acquisitions. Their website was deliberately vague about their methods, but reading between the lines, it seemed they bought art from people who didn't necessarily know what they had. I took the subway into Manhattan, spending money I couldn't afford on transportation, but I needed answers. Thomas Kellner Fine Arts occupied a small office on the 3rd floor of a nondescript building near the Garment District. The waiting area was cramped and smelled like old coffee and cigarettes. Thomas Kellner himself was a thin man in his late 40s with nervous hands and darting eyes. When I explained why I was there, he became visibly uncomfortable, adjusting his tie and shuffling papers on his desk. "I'm sorry, Mr. Brennan," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Client confidentiality prevents me from discussing specific transactions." "The client was my ex-wife," I said firmly. "Sarah Mitchell, formerly Sarah Brennan. She sold you paintings that belonged to our deceased son." Kellner's face went pale. He stood up abruptly, walking to his office window and staring out at the street below. "Mr. Brennan, I think there's been a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding is how those paintings ended up being sold without my knowledge or consent." He turned back to me, his expression conflicted. "The woman who brought me the paintings, she said they were by a young artist who died. She had death certificates, documentation. I assumed she was the executor of the estate." "What exactly did she tell you?" Kellner sat back down, pulling out a file folder with hands that trembled slightly. "She said the artist was a prodigy who died young of illness. She brought 12 pieces total, all small canvases. She seemed desperate for money. I offered $15,000 for the lot." $15,000. The number hit me like a punch. "You sold them to Marcus Whitfield for how much?" "I can't discuss specific Mr. Kellner, I interrupted, leaning forward in my chair. Those paintings were created by my son, Alex Brennan, who died of leukemia when he was 8 years old. My ex-wife had no legal right to sell them. I want to know exactly what happened. The silence stretched between us. Finally, Kellner opened the file and pulled out a photograph. It showed Sarah sitting in his office, signing papers. She looked thinner than I remembered, worn down in a way that spoke of recent hardship. She came in February of 2021, he said quietly. She was crying. Said she needed money urgently, that her husband had lost his job and they were facing foreclosure. She brought the paintings in cardboard boxes, said they were all she had left of value. And you didn't question the documentation? The death certificate was legitimate. Alexander Brennan died March 21, 2016 of acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The documentation showed her as the surviving parent with custody of personal effects. I felt my chest tighten. Of course, the paperwork was technically legal. After our divorce, Sarah had retained custody of Alex's belongings, but morally, ethically, those paintings belonged to both of us. They were our son's legacy. When did you sell them to Marcus Whitfield? Kellner consulted his files. That same month, I had 3 collectors interested, but Whitfield made the best offer, $45,000 per piece for 8 of them. The other 4 went to different buyers, $360,000. Marcus had paid Kellner $360,000 for paintings Sarah had sold for $15,000 total. The math made me sick. Did Whitfield know the real story, the artist's age? Kellner's pause told me everything I needed to know. I may have mentioned that the artist was very young when these were created. Whitfield said it made them more marketable. I stood up so quickly that my chair scraped against the floor. He knew they were painted by a child, and he still created that elaborate backstory. Mr. Brennan, please understand. No, I cut him off. You and Whitfield both knew exactly what you were doing. You took advantage of a grieving woman's desperation and turned my son's memory into a commodity. Kellner's face flushed red. Your ex-wife came to me voluntarily. She signed all the papers. Everything was legal. Legal doesn't make it right. I left his office with photocopies of the sale documents and a new understanding of exactly how deep this betrayal went. Sarah hadn't just sold Alex's paintings in a moment of financial desperation. She'd allowed them to be repackaged, renamed, and sold to people who would never know they were admiring the work of a terminally ill child who'd painted to feel strong. The subway ride back to Brooklyn gave me time to think. I needed to confront Sarah, but first I wanted to return to the Whitfield Gallery with my new knowledge. Marcus had thought he could intimidate me into backing down, but he'd underestimated the determination of a father fighting for his son's memory. The gallery looked the same when I approached it that afternoon. Same polished facade, same elegant signage, same sense of exclusivity that was designed to make ordinary people feel unwelcome. But I wasn't ordinary anymore. I was a man with documentation, with proof, and with nothing left to lose. Marcus saw me coming before I'd even reached the front desk. He emerged from his office with a concerned expression, probably wondering why his former janitor was back for a second humiliation. Mr. Brennan, he said carefully, I thought we'd resolved our situation yesterday. I pulled out the photocopies from Thomas Kellner's office, spreading them on the reception desk like evidence in a courtroom. We need to talk, Marcus, about Alex Brennan, age 8, who painted Blue Elephant in Paradise 6 years before he died of cancer. Marcus's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, concern, then something that looked like calculation. He glanced at the documents, then at me, then at the handful of visitors browsing the gallery. Perhaps we should discuss this in my office, he said quietly. His office was a temple to his own success. Expensive furniture, awards on the walls, photographs of him with various celebrities and politicians. He sat behind his mahogany desk like a judge preparing to deliver a verdict. Mr. Brennan, he began, I understand you're grieving. Cut the act, Marcus. I placed Thomas Kellner's business card on his desk. I know you bought 8 paintings from Kellner in February of 2021. I know you paid $45,000 each for work that a desperate mother sold for $1,500 per piece. His jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. All transactions were conducted legally and in good faith. Ugh, good faith? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You knew those paintings were created by a child. Kellner told you, and instead of being honest about their origin, you created elaborate fictional biographies to justify charging collectors hundreds of thousands of dollars. Marcus stood up, straightening his tie in a gesture I was beginning to recognize as his tell when he felt cornered. The art market is about perception and value, Mr. Brennan. These pieces have genuine artistic merit regardless of the age of their creator. They have merit because they were painted by my son, with love and hope and the kind of pure vision that only comes from a child facing his own mortality. My voice was rising, but I didn't care. You've turned his memory into a lie. I've given his work the recognition it deserves, Marcus shot back. Those paintings were moldering in boxes before I acquired them. Now they're appreciated by people who understand art. Appreciated by people who think they're buying the work of some mysterious, tragic genius, not the finger paintings of an 8-year-old boy. Marcus sat back down, his expression hardening. What exactly do you want, Mr. Brennan? I want you to look at the back of that canvas, I said quietly. The blue elephant painting. Turn it around and read what my son wrote there. Something flickered in Marcus's eyes. Fear, maybe, or recognition that his carefully constructed deception was about to crumble. And then, I continued, I want you to give me back my son's paintings. All of them. That's impossible. They've been sold to legitimate buyers who were lied to about what they were purchasing. I leaned forward, meeting his gaze directly. Marcus, you have 24 hours to figure out how to make this right. Because if you don't, I'm going to tell everyone exactly how the respected Whitfield Gallery built its reputation by exploiting a dead child's artwork. I left him sitting behind his expensive desk, surrounded by the trappings of success that were built on lies and greed. As I walked back through the gallery, past the 3 paintings that should have been hanging in my apartment or donated to a children's hospital in Alex's memory, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 8 years. I felt like Alex's father again, and I was going to bring my son home. Finding Sarah's current address took 3 phone calls and a small lie about needing to update insurance beneficiaries. She and James Mitchell lived in a modest colonial house in Stamford, Connecticut, a far cry from the sprawling estate I'd imagined when she'd first told me about her real estate developer husband. The 40-minute train ride from Grand Central gave me time to rehearse what I wanted to say, but every imagined conversation ended the same way, with me asking the question that had been burning in my chest for 2 days. How could she have sold our son's paintings to strangers? The house sat on a quiet street lined with maple trees that were just beginning to turn orange and red. The lawn needed mowing, and there were newspapers piled up on the front steps, suggesting that the perfect suburban life Sarah had been chasing might not be as stable as she'd hoped. I rang the doorbell twice before I heard footsteps inside. When the door opened, I barely recognized the woman standing before me. Sarah had always been meticulous about her appearance, but now her dark hair was streaked with premature gray and pulled back in a loose ponytail. She'd lost weight, and not in a healthy way. Her clothes hung on her frame like they belonged to someone else. Howard. She said my name like she'd been expecting this visit, like she'd been dreading it for years. Hello, Sarah. We stood there for a moment, studying each other across the threshold of her new life. 8 years of separation had changed us both, carved new lines on our faces and new wariness in our eyes. I suppose you'd better come in, she said finally, stepping aside. The house was smaller inside than it appeared from the street. The furniture was nice, but not expensive, and there were telltale signs of financial stress. Generic brand products on the kitchen counter, overdue bills stacked on a side table, a notice from the electric company visible in the pile. James is at work, she said, leading me into the living room. He doesn't know you're coming. Does he know what you did? She flinched at the question but didn't answer immediately. Instead, she sat down in an armchair that faced away from the window, keeping her back to the autumn light. Would you like some coffee? I was just making... Sarah! I remained standing, keeping my voice level. I found them. Her face crumpled like paper thrown in a fire. She covered it with her hands, and for a moment I heard the woman I'd once been married to, the mother who'd held our dying son and promised him everything would be okay. I know, she whispered through her fingers. I've been waiting for this conversation for 3 years. 3 years? You sold them 3.5 years ago. She looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. I've been checking the galleries online, watching to see where they ended up. I knew someday you'd see them. I sat down on the couch across from her, trying to process this admission. You've been tracking them? You've known all along that they were being sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars? Sarah laughed, but it was a broken sound devoid of any joy. I know exactly how much Marcus Whitfield is charging for them. 150,000, 200,000. I see the prices every day. Every day. I look at the gallery websites every morning. It's become a ritual, I suppose, like picking at a scab. She wiped her nose with a tissue she pulled from her pocket. I tell myself I'm checking to make sure they're being taken care of, but really, I think I'm punishing myself. I felt my anger wavering, replaced by something more complicated. Why, Sarah? Why did you sell them? The story came out in pieces, interrupted by tears and long silences. James had lost his job in early 2021 when his real estate development company went bankrupt. They'd been living beyond their means, counting on bonuses and deals that never materialized. The mortgage payments on their dream house had become impossible. We were going to lose everything, she said, staring at her hands. The house, the cars, our credit. James was talking about bankruptcy, but I couldn't face it. I couldn't face admitting that I'd failed again. So you decided to sell Alex's paintings. I went up to the attic looking for things we could sell. James's golf clubs, some of my jewelry, anything with value, and I found the boxes with Alex's artwork. Her voice broke on our son's name. I hadn't looked at them since we moved here. Opening those boxes, seeing his paintings again. She couldn't finish the sentence. I waited, remembering my own experience of going through Alex's belongings, the way grief could ambush you years later with the same devastating force as the day he died. I told myself it was just a few paintings, she continued, that Alex would understand, that he'd want to help his mother. She looked up at me with desperate eyes. You know how he was always trying to take care of everyone. Remember how he saved his allowance to buy me flowers when I was sad? These weren't just any paintings, Sarah. They were his legacy. The only physical proof that our son existed and created beautiful things. I know. The words came out as a whisper. I know what I took from you. From his memory, but Howard, we were going to lose the house. James was drinking again, talking about how he'd ruined everything. I was so scared. How many pieces did you sell to Kellner? She was quiet for so long that I thought she wasn't going to answer. 12. 12. I felt the number hit me like a physical blow. 12 paintings for $15,000. Kellner said they were just child's artwork. That $15,000 was generous for amateur pieces. She laughed bitterly. I was so desperate that I believed him. Or maybe I wanted to believe him because it made what I was doing seem less terrible. Did you know he was going to resell them? Not at first. I thought he collected children's art, maybe for a museum or education program. She pulled out her phone and opened a bookmarks folder. But then I found Alex's Blue Elephant online 6 months later, listed as Childhood Dreams in Cerulean by an unnamed prodigy artist. Price tag $150,000. She showed me the screen, and I saw she had bookmarks for dozens of gallery websites, art auction sites, collector forums. She'd been obsessively tracking every mention of Alex's work across the internet. You've been torturing yourself for 3 years? I deserve to be tortured. Her voice was flat, empty. I sold my dead son's paintings to pay for a house I can't afford, married to a man who drinks too much and blames everyone but himself for his failures. Where are the other 8 paintings? The ones Whitfield didn't buy? Sarah scrolled through her bookmarks, showing me screenshots of galleries in Los Angeles, Chicago, Miami. Scattered across the country, all with false backstories, all selling for more money than James and I will see in our lifetimes. I leaned back on the couch, overwhelmed by the scope of what she'd done. It wasn't just that she'd sold Alex's artwork without my knowledge or consent. She'd allowed our son's memory to be commodified, turned into marketing materials for wealthy collectors who would never know they were buying the final creations of a child fighting for his life. Sarah, those paintings were all we had left of him. I know. They were supposed to be preserved, maybe donated to the children's hospital where he was treated. They were supposed to mean something. I know. And you sold them for $15,000 to pay for a house you're going to lose anyway. She looked up sharply at that last comment, and I realized I'd hit on something she hadn't told me yet. We're 3 months behind on the mortgage, she admitted. James found another job, but it pays half what he used to make. The bank is starting foreclosure proceedings. The irony was suffocating. She'd destroyed our son's legacy to save a house she was losing anyway, to prop up a marriage that was clearly falling apart, to maintain a lifestyle that had been built on credit and wishful thinking. I want them back, Sarah. I can't give them back. I don't own them anymore. Then you're going to help me get them back. I stood up, my decision made. You're going to contact every gallery, every collector, every person who bought Alex's work based on lies. You're going to tell them the truth about what they purchased. Sarah's face went pale. Howard, I can't. If James finds out what I did, if it becomes public, then you should have thought about that before you sold our son's memory for grocery money. The words hung in the air between us, cruel and true and final. Sarah began crying again, deep sobs that shook her entire body. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her we'd figure this out together the way we once figured out everything together. But the larger part of me, the part that had spent 8 years grieving not just Alex's death, but the loss of everything that connected me to him, felt no sympathy for the woman who'd chosen money over memory. You have until tomorrow evening, I said, moving toward the door. Start making those calls. Tell them who Alex really was. Tell them his age, his story, his fight against cancer. Give his paintings back their truth. And if I don't, I paused with my hand on the doorknob, then I'll do it myself. But I'll make sure everyone knows that you were the one who turned your own son's legacy into a con game. I left her sitting in her failing suburban dream, surrounded by generic furniture and overdue bills, and the weight of choices that couldn't be undone. As I walked back to the train station, I thought about Alex's last painting, the boy flying a kite with his father. The kite had been blue, the same shade as his elephant. Tomorrow I would start bringing those kites home. Sarah called me at 6 in the morning, 2 days after our confrontation. Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been crying or hadn't slept. I did what you asked, she said without preamble. I called them, all of them. I sat up in my narrow bed, instantly awake. Through my single window I could see the first hint of dawn breaking over Brooklyn's rooftops. Which galleries? Marcus Whitfield, the collector in Los Angeles who bought 2 pieces. The gallery in Chicago that has 3. The private collector in Miami. Her voice cracked. They're all furious, Howard. They're threatening to sue me for misrepresentation. Good. They should be furious. They were lied to. Marcus is the worst. He screamed at me for 20 minutes about damaging his reputation, destroying the market value of the works. He said I'd signed legal documents transferring all rights and that I had no authority to make these claims. I stood up, pacing the small space of my apartment. What did you tell him? The truth, that Alex was 8 years old when he painted them, that he died of leukemia, that the mysterious young prodigy story was complete fiction. She paused. Howard, some of these people paid over $200,000 for individual pieces. One collector bought 2 paintings for nearly $500,000 total. The numbers made my stomach turn. Almost $500,000 for artwork that Sarah had sold for a total of $15,000. The greed was staggering. Did any of them agree to return the paintings? The gallery in Chicago wants to meet with us. They said if we can provide documentation proving Alex's identity and age when the paintings were created, they'll consider returning them rather than face potential fraud charges. Sarah's voice became smaller. The others are threatening legal action. They say we're trying to extort them. Let them threaten. We have the documentation. Birth certificates, death certificates, medical records proving Alex's treatment timeline. We can prove exactly when those paintings were created. There's something else. Sarah's tone made my chest tighten. Marcus admitted that he suspected the real story from the beginning. When I called him, he said he'd always known there was something unusual about the artist's background, but that he'd chosen not to investigate too deeply because the paintings were so marketable. I felt a familiar rage building in my chest. He knew they were painted by a child, and he created that elaborate fiction anyway. He also told me that he sold one of Alex's paintings to a private collector in Europe. It's already been shipped. We may never get that one back. I closed my eyes, thinking about one of Alex's creations hanging in some stranger's home in London or Paris or Rome, valued for its beauty but stripped of its true meaning. The painting would spend eternity being admired for the wrong reasons by people who would never know they were looking at the final gift of a dying child. Sarah, we need to meet. Today, I want to go to that gallery in Chicago, and I want you to come with me. The silence stretched so long that I thought she'd hung up. Finally, she said, James doesn't know what I did. If I leave town with you, if this becomes public, your marriage is already over, Sarah. You said yourself that you're losing the house, that James is drinking again. You can either help me fix this, or you can watch your life fall apart while Alex's memory continues to be exploited. She agreed to meet me at Grand Central at noon. The train to Chicago left at 2:15. Sarah looked even worse than she had at her house. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes wrinkled, and she carried herself like someone who'd given up on the possibility of redemption. But she'd brought a manila folder thick with documentation. Alex's birth certificate, medical records from his treatment, photographs of him painting in his hospital room, and, most importantly, pictures I'd never seen of him working on the specific paintings that were now scattered across the country. I found these in James's office, she said, handing me a photograph that made my breath catch. It showed Alex, bald from chemotherapy but grinning widely, holding up a canvas showing a family of rabbits having a picnic. He was so proud of this one. He said the baby rabbit looked just like his cousin Emma. I stared at the photo, remembering that afternoon. Alex had been feeling good that day, energetic enough to paint for 3 hours straight. It was one of the last times I'd seen him truly happy. Where's this painting now? Sarah consulted a list she'd made. Private collector in Miami. Sold as pastoral dreams by an artist described as a young visionary who understood the profound beauty in simple family gatherings. The description made me sick. They'd taken Alex's innocent portrayal of rabbits playing together and turned it into some pretentious artistic statement about family dynamics. The gallery districts in Chicago occupied a converted warehouse space in the River North neighborhood. Clean white walls, polished concrete floors, the kind of modern industrial aesthetic that was supposed to make visitors feel sophisticated. The owner, Rebecca Hartman, was waiting for us when we arrived. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with short auburn hair and the kind of nervous energy that suggested she was as uncomfortable with this situation as we were. Mr. and Mrs. Brennan, she said, extending her hand, thank you for coming. This is a very unusual situation. It's Sarah Mitchell now, Sarah corrected quietly. We've been divorced for 8 years. Rebecca led us into her office where 3 of Alex's paintings hung on the walls. Seeing them together took my breath away. There was the rabbit family, a painting of a lighthouse standing against a storm, and a canvas showing children playing on a beach. All were displayed with professional lighting and elegant frames that probably cost more than I made in a month. These works were sold to me as the creations of a young artist who died of a rare illness, Rebecca said, settling behind her desk. The documentation I received indicated that the artist was a prodigy who'd produced sophisticated work despite his youth. When Mrs. Mitchell called yesterday claiming the artist was her 8-year-old son, I was skeptical. I pulled out the photographs Sarah had brought, spreading them across Rebecca's desk. This is Alex Brennan, my son, painting these exact works in his hospital room at Memorial Sloan Kettering. He was undergoing chemotherapy for acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Rebecca studied the photographs carefully, comparing them to the paintings on her walls. Her expression grew more troubled with each image. "The rabbit painting," I continued, pointing to the photo of Alex holding the canvas. "He painted that on October 15th, 2015. You can see from his hospital bracelet that he was a patient. The lighthouse was painted 3 weeks later, during a particularly difficult round of treatment. He said storms couldn't hurt lighthouses because they were built to be strong." "And the beach scene?" Sarah spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "Christmas Day, 2015. We brought paints to the hospital so Alex could work while the other children opened presents. He said he wanted to paint somewhere warm because the hospital was always so cold." Rebecca was quiet for a long time, studying the documentation we'd provided. Finally, she looked up, her face pale. "I paid $180,000 for these 3 paintings. The seller, Thomas Kellner, provided certificates of authenticity and a detailed provenance claiming they were the work of a talented young artist who died in a tragic accident." "Alex's death wasn't an accident," I said firmly. "It was the result of a disease that we fought for 18 months. Every painting he created during that time was an act of hope, a way of staying connected to the world he was afraid of leaving." "Mr. Brennan, if what you're telling me is true, then I've been displaying and marketing artwork under completely false pretenses. The biography I've been sharing with potential buyers describes a young artist who produced mature, sophisticated work. I never mentioned that he was a child, or that these were painted during cancer treatment." Sarah leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Rebecca, I need you to understand something. When I sold these paintings to Kellner, I was desperate. My husband had lost his job, we were facing foreclosure, and I convinced myself that Alex would want to help his family. But I never authorized anyone to create false stories about who he was or why he painted. The market value of these works is based entirely on the fictional biography I was provided," Rebecca said slowly. "If buyers knew they were purchasing the artwork of an 8-year-old child undergoing cancer treatment, they would be worth significantly less." "They would be worth exactly what they should be worth," I said. "They're not sophisticated artistic statements by a mysterious prodigy. They're the creations of a little boy who painted because it made him feel strong when everything else made him feel weak." Rebecca stood up, walking over to the rabbit painting. She stared at it for a long moment, and I could see her reassessing everything she thought she knew about the work. "The brushwork," she said finally. "I always thought there was something wonderfully innocent about it, something pure. I assumed it was intentional, part of the artist's style." "It was intentional," I said. "Alex painted the way children paint when they're not worried about technique or market value or critical reception. He painted joy." "What do you want from me?" I stood up, joining her in front of Alex's work. "I want you to give me back my son's paintings, and I want you to help me contact the other buyers, the ones who've been lied to about what they purchased." "Mr. Brennan, I understand your position, but I have a significant financial investment in these works. If I return them, I lose everything I paid." "Then sue Thomas Kellner for fraud, sue Marcus Whitfield for conspiracy, but don't make my son's memory pay the price for their greed." Rebecca was quiet for a long time, studying the documentation and photographs spread across her desk. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, softer. "I became an art dealer because I believe in the power of art to move people, to tell stories that matter. These paintings—" She gestured toward Alex's work. "Knowing the truth about them, knowing that they were created by a child fighting for his life, they're more powerful than any fictional biography could make them." She turned to face both Sarah and me. "I'll return the paintings, all 3 of them, and I'll help you contact the other buyers who were deceived by this same scheme." As we left the gallery that evening, carrying 3 of Alex's paintings in protective portfolios, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 8 years. I felt like I was bringing my son home. But I also knew this was just the beginning. There were still 8 more paintings out there, scattered across the country, their true stories buried under layers of lies and greed. The fight wasn't over. It was just getting started. 6 months later, I stood in my apartment looking at 11 of Alex's paintings hanging on my walls. 11 out of the 12 that Sarah had sold to Thomas Kellner. The 12th was somewhere in London, sold to a private collector who'd refused all contact and threatened legal action if we continued to pursue him. The apartment looked different now. Where once there had been empty walls and the hollow feeling of a life stripped of meaning, now there was color and life and memory. Alex's blue elephant held the place of honor above my small dining table, surrounded by the rabbit family, the lighthouse in the storm, the beach scene with children playing, and 7 other canvases that told the story of a little boy's courage in the face of impossible odds. But the most important change wasn't in my apartment. It was in what had happened to Marcus Whitfield and the Whitfield Gallery. The scandal had started small, with a local art blog picking up the story of a father fighting to reclaim his deceased son's paintings. Within days, it had grown into something larger. Art collectors began questioning the provenance of other works in Marcus's gallery. Journalists started investigating Thomas Kellner's business practices. The New York Times ran a feature story titled, "The Price of Fiction: How Grief Became a Marketing Tool in the Art World." Marcus tried to control the narrative at first, issuing statements about being a victim of fraudulent documentation, claiming he'd acted in good faith based on the paperwork provided by Kellner. But Rebecca Hartman had been true to her word, helping us contact other buyers and providing documentation that showed Marcus had been far more aware of the deceptive practices than he'd initially admitted. The breaking point came when we discovered that the Whitfield Gallery had been systematically acquiring artwork through similar schemes for years. Estate sales where desperate families sold valuable pieces for fractions of their worth, only to see them reappear months later with inflated price tags and fabricated histories. Alex's paintings weren't an anomaly, they were part of a pattern. 3 weeks ago, Marcus Whitfield had closed his gallery permanently. The building now housed a coffee shop, and Marcus himself had relocated to Florida, where he was reportedly selling real estate and avoiding phone calls from journalists and former clients. Thomas Kellner had declared bankruptcy and was facing fraud charges in 3 states. Sarah and I had testified before a grand jury investigating art fraud schemes in the New York metro area. It had been strange, sitting beside her in that courtroom, united in purpose for the first time since Alex's death. We weren't married anymore, would never be married again, but we'd found a way to honor our son's memory together. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. When I opened it, Sarah stood in the hallway holding a small wrapped package and wearing an expression I hadn't seen in years, something approaching peace. "I brought you something," she said, stepping inside and looking around at the transformed apartment. "Howard, this is beautiful. Alex would love seeing his work displayed like this." I made coffee while she unwrapped the package. Inside was a small canvas I'd never seen before, showing a boy and a man sitting on a park bench feeding ducks. The style was unmistakably Alex's, but the composition was more advanced than his earlier work. "Where did you find this?" "It was in James's office, tucked behind some files. I think Alex gave it to me just before he got really sick, and I'd forgotten about it in all the chaos." She touched the corner of the canvas gently. "Look at the signature." In the bottom right corner, Alex had written, "For Mama and Papa," in his careful block letters. I felt my throat tighten. This painting wasn't part of the 12 Sarah had sold to Kellner. It was one more piece of Alex that had been hidden away, waiting to be rediscovered. "Sarah, this belongs to both of us." She shook her head. "I gave up my right to his artwork when I sold the others. This is yours now, Howard, along with my apology, which I know comes too late to matter." We sat in silence for a while, drinking coffee and looking at Alex's paintings. The afternoon light streaming through my window hit the canvases just right, making the colors glow with the kind of vibrant life that Alex had always managed to capture. "I've been thinking about what to do with some of them," I said finally. Rebecca Hartman suggested donating a few pieces to Memorial Sloan Kettering to hang in the pediatric wing where Alex was treated. Sarah's eyes brightened. He would love that, knowing that his paintings might help other children feel brave. I thought maybe we could do it together. A small ceremony, nothing elaborate, just a way to make sure his story is told the right way this time. She nodded, unable to speak around the tears that were flowing freely now. I stood up, walking over to the blue elephant painting. On the back, just as I'd told Marcus Whitfield, were 5 words written in Alex's careful handwriting. For Papa, my best teacher. But there was something else I'd never mentioned to anyone, something I'd discovered when I'd carefully removed the painting from its frame to check for damage. Below Alex's dedication, in tiny letters near the bottom edge of the canvas, he'd written one more line: "Love never ends." Those words had become my anchor during the darkest parts of this fight. When Marcus tried to intimidate me, when lawyers threatened lawsuits, when the whole battle seemed hopeless, I'd remember what my 8-year-old son had understood instinctively. Love doesn't end with death, and it doesn't end with betrayal, and it certainly doesn't end with greed. Love endures. 6 months after finding Alex's painting in the Whitfield Gallery, I had a new job. Rebecca Hartman had offered me a position as a consultant, helping galleries verify the provenance and authenticity of artwork, particularly pieces claimed to be by deceased artists. The work paid enough for me to move to a larger apartment, one with room for all of Alex's paintings and space for the easel I'd bought but hadn't used in 8 years. Yesterday, for the first time since Alex died, I'd mixed paints on a palette and touched brush to canvas. I wasn't ready to create anything meaningful yet, but I was ready to remember why art had once been important to me. I was ready to remember what Alex had tried to teach me in those last months, that creating something beautiful was an act of hope, regardless of how much time you had left to enjoy it. The memorial exhibition opened on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 8 years after Alex had painted his blue elephant. Memorial Sloan Kettering had dedicated a small gallery space in the pediatric wing to his work, with proper documentation this time. Each painting was labeled with its true history, the date Alex painted it, his age, and a brief description of his fight against leukemia. The centerpiece was a plaque that read, "Alexander Brennan, 2008-2016. These paintings were created during his courageous battle with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Alex painted because, in his words, art makes me feel strong. His legacy lives on in every child who finds strength through creativity." Doctors, nurses, and families with children currently undergoing treatment came to the opening. I watched a little girl, maybe 7 years old and bald from chemotherapy, stand in front of Alex's rabbit painting for 10 minutes, studying every brushstroke. "The baby rabbit looks happy," she said to her mother. "Yes," her mother replied. "The boy who painted this wanted everyone to be happy." As I stood there watching children and families find hope and beauty in Alex's work, I realized that this was how his story was supposed to end. Not with his paintings hanging in expensive galleries under false names, valued for fictional histories created by greedy dealers. But here, in a place where sick children could see proof that someone like them had found a way to create beauty in the midst of suffering. Sarah stood beside me, both of us fighting back tears as we watched Alex's art serve its true purpose, giving hope to children who needed it most. "He did it," she whispered. "He found a way to help other kids feel strong." I nodded, thinking about the inscription on the back of the blue elephant painting. "Love never ends." My son was gone, but his love lived on in every child who looked at his paintings and found the courage to pick up their own brush. The dealers and collectors who'd tried to profit from his death had been exposed and defeated. Marcus Whitfield and Thomas Kellner would never again exploit a grieving family's loss for financial gain. But more importantly, Alex's true story was finally being told. Not as a mysterious prodigy or a tragic young genius, but as a little boy who painted elephants and rabbits and lighthouses because art made him feel strong when everything else made him feel small. As families moved through the small gallery space, some laughing, some crying, all finding something meaningful in Alex's work, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced since the day he died. This was what fighting for his memory had been about. Not revenge against the people who'd exploited him, though that justice had been satisfying. This was about ensuring that Alex's legacy would be what he'd always intended it to be, a gift of hope for children who needed to believe that strength could be found in the most unlikely places. I left the hospital that evening knowing that my son's paintings were exactly where they belonged, bringing light to dark places, comfort to frightened families, and proof that love, creativity, and hope could survive even the most devastating losses. Alex's blue elephant would never again be sold as childhood dreams in cerulean for $150,000. Instead, it would hang forever in a place where children could see it and know that a boy their age had faced his fears with a paintbrush in his hand and love in his heart, and that was worth more than all the money in the world.